Hey everyone, so welcome to the Banh Chronicles podcast. I am your host Randy Kim, and I'm here with a friend, Ranier Maningding. He is a Filipino American copywriter, brand strategist, and founder of LLAG Media, a strategic communications and content production agent built for progressive brands and organizations. So for over a decade, he's been writing political and cultural commentary on the intersection of race, propaganda, geopolitics, and pop culture. He is also the host of Seasoned Fighters, a podcast series highlighting the uncrowned champions of social and political change. So I was on your show more recently, like earlier this year, and I really appreciated our conversation. And I've been following you for quite some time. Like I gotta say, it's like before pandemic, and I have followed your work on Love Life of an Asian Guy, which is LLAG. Um, and I've been following your journey and resonate with a lot of the progressive viewpoints that you have shared. And being on your podcast, Season Fighters, I mean, it was a great discussion that we had on grief, the political and social climate, among others. And I'm honored to have you on my show, but also to, hear your side of the coin too in the work that you've been doing for the past decade.
Great. I mean, it's an honor to be here. I know that we've talked on and off for several years, even jumping on each other's podcasts. So it's fun that we actually finally got to do it this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, I want to start by asking, like, how we're halfway through this year, and what have you observed about yourself in the way you approach your work in personal care?
I think I've learned over the years, when I first started creating content, I had it in my head that I was going to post multiple times every single day.
Mm,
And this is when I was in my mid 20s, and I just had a very aggressive posting schedule, and I was working a full-time job.
mm,
And I think content creation, you you realize how much work it takes
mhm,
to produce work, to engage with your audience. And in my younger years, I was so eager to uh, rally around my community and soak up praise and be engaged and involved.
mhm,
And I still value all of that, but I think as I've gotten older, I've also greatly appreciated my alone time to just sit with certain topics and allow certain subjects to marinate a little bit longer as opposed to
mhm,
feeling like I need to get them out right away. And so I've learned to strike that balance because there
mhm,
is a lot of content that I do that needs to be posted consistently, especially when it comes to news and politics. I mean,
mhm,
Trump is doing something every hour, it
mhm,
seems. Um, and I try to balance that by doing things that are a little bit slower. I mean, whether it's my garden content or, talking about pop culture,
mhm.
music and movies. And so I think having that balance has been really healthy for me to be able to just feed the different sides of myself as a writer, as a creator, as an activist. Um, yeah, I think having that balance is really important creatively.
Yeah, because I think like when you create content, it also feels very, and I see this with content creators in general, like that there's this need to like get everything like immediately to react like constantly. But also like instead of reacting, like we forget to respond. I think that there is a sense of like, how do we let things manifest and let things develop? And so that gives us time to kind of process where we are at. Because I do think that there is value in being able to share things in real time, but there's also times when we need to be in real time, kind of like understanding what this all means, right?
No, exactly. I mean, when I first started to talk about the Iran war, or when I first started talking about Palestine, I remember how daunting it felt because I I didn't really know enough about Palestine or
Mm,
Israel or
mm,
Iran. Um, but then there's also this urgency to, do my homework and realize that sure, there are certain conversations that I can marinate and spend time and feel like I need to wait a long time to get a perfect understanding. But then
mm,
there's also times when uh, we don't always have the luxury of doing that. There could be a
Hmm.
tragedy, it could be COVID, and there are times when people need your voice. And so that's also something that I had to learn, which is that, even though I do appreciate the slowness of certain forms of content, um, there is also that important role of uh, being a voice in the community. And, whether it's talking about Rick Chow and Cyrus Carmick
Hmm.
Belton, um, or ICE, there are some things that you have to almost convey your confusion with other people and let
Hmm.
them know that the things are happening, and maybe I'm still processing my feelings, or maybe we don't even know what's going on, but I'm here with you, experiencing it with you, and
Hmm.
we'll be able to talk through it together.
Yeah, I think that's a good framework that you just brought up because it's like we can't always be the experts on everything minute by minute. And
Hmm.
I think one of the things that we have to acknowledge, and I think this is something that I've shared with other folks, is that we have to acknowledge where we fall short of or where we don't have the full understanding of. And it's okay to convey that. Like, because I do think that there is this sense of how social media runs, like we need to get like people are waiting for us to react, people are waiting
Hmm.
for us for a response,
Hmm. Hmm.
like or a celebrity to respond, like okay, like this person like tragically passed away. Wh- what is this person thinking of like in the next hours? Like, and I feel like, well, we kind of have to be very mindful about, I think, our own expectations of what is considered a timely response. And I think that sometimes I think it's okay to be like, look, I have a lot to think about. Right now, my heart goes out to such and such, but at this moment, I am trying to process the shock that everyone else is feeling right now. And what does this mean afterwards, So I think that that's something that I kind of like marinate in, kind of like oscillate between that word of like having to have a timely response, but also understanding that not all fast responses are the most effective ways of doing it because there's a risk of misinformation, there's a risk of like losing some of the nuance that we forget about. And I am very curious about like when you started Lag Media, The Love Life of an Asian Guy, what was your approach then when you were starting out? I'd say it was about a decade ago. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I started the Love Life of an Asian Guy as a blog when I was 18, so over 15 years ago.
Mm.
And I started it on WordPress with the premise that I felt like there wasn't enough representation for Asian men in media. I mean, this is also when I was still single, so I was very much interested in seeing like, Asian males as the lead role, getting the girl.
Hmm.
Like that was my sort of goal in terms of the type of representation I wanted to see. And so I figured like a great way to play my role is to document my own love life. I mean, that's why it was called The Love Life of an Asian
Hmm.
Guy.
Hmm.
But spoiler alert, I met my wife when I was 21, so just like a mere 2 years into it. Um, and so like I had my happy ending, right? I like it was almost like, well, no need for the blog anymore.
Yeah.
But I I was really interested in talking about initially the politics of being an Asian man dating, and then I met my wife in an AMBW, Asian Men, Black Women Facebook group,
Hmm.
and so that's when I really got my um, toes into the waters of the politics of dating, and especially as conversations around Black Lives Matter and police brutality were happening, I started to notice that there were a lot of Asian men who just they wanted to date black women, and they were talking about how much they thought that black women were cute and blah 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 blah, but they just had no interest in the lived experiences of black women or black people or
Hmm.
anti-blackness, and that just irked me. Like it maybe it's because I didn't realize I was in a group with a bunch of conservative Asian dudes, but it
Hmm.
frustrated me that they didn't want to care about these subjects that like, you want these women to care about the lack of representation for Asian men, how come you don't care about the way that Black women are mistreated?
Mhm.
And so that's what started it. And it really just snowballed into me thinking about and caring about all of the different social political topics that revolve around being Asian, around being Black, around being a person of color, around capitalism, around being an American. And it just started to branch out from there. Um, and 10 years, or rather 7 years into me having the page, at the same time, I was working in marketing, sales and advertising. And I just felt like I was leading this double life where, on one hand, my work, my writing was all about social politics and progressive
Mhm.
politics.
Mhm.
But then I'm working for these industries that are very exploitive, whether it is real estate or advertising.
Mhm.
And a lot of marketing and advertising, you only work with the biggest brands, and oftentimes you're working with some unsavory people. And so I started my agency as a way to kind of bridge that divide and say, you know what, I want to take the skills that I've developed within this field and I actually want to apply it to nonprofit organizations, to small brands and small businesses, uh, because I think one of the most difficult things is to promote and sell good things. It's easy to sell makeup in a casino
Mhm.
and a $2 million home and a luxury resort in Bali. But to promote that there is a community garden that provides, uh, a soup kitchen service every Sunday, it's a much different sell. And I think from
Mhm.
a marketing perspective, I saw that as a challenge, similar to when I first started the Love Life of an Asian Guy, as a
Mhm.
challenge to, like, there's this narrative that's being ignored or being told, and I want to tell a different story. And so I charted that different path for marketing.
Yeah, I think about like what that landscape has looked like, especially when you are in predominantly white spaces, especially in the marketing and in the agency field and what that really looks like, and also having to think about, well, is there a place for the conversations that I want to have, especially regarding um, anti-Black racism and also the very deep progressive or deep seated issues that are our in our Asian communities as a whole here. And
Mhm.
I also I wonder because having to do like a Facebook page and then doing the social media work, that you build a community in a sense, and it's almost kind of like I don't want to say it's accidental, but it's also something that we kind of forget. Like all of a sudden, like, wow, there's a community, but they're also making friends with one another. They're learning from each other. They're bringing in points of views that you're kind of like, okay, I never would have thought that. And and then all of a sudden becomes this responsibility. Because I remember a couple of years ago, I think you had a situation where you were just really struggling with trying to navigate this and having to work with moderators, that had to volunteer themselves, and how much of a full-time job that is. And sometimes this is why I wouldn't do a Discord or like my own, you know, Facebook group for that because I just don't have the time to like, get into the back and forth. And that's not how my mind works. I would rather do this in person and have a conversation rather than having to spend half of my day, having to think about my responses and feeling like I have to be pressured into responding, as I mentioned earlier. So I wonder about how do you navigate like, this community aspect of your own work?
Ooh, I mean, that's a very, very difficult thing to balance because, like you said, um, when you end up with a community, it is both by design and also by accident. You design it in the sense that I'm creating content that I want to rally people around to have these conversations and break bread and debate and, you know, connect with one another. And to my surprise, a lot of people came to my community and a lot of people joined. And, you know, by the time I was 26, I was, my Facebook page had 250,000 followers.
Wow.
Um, and at that time, Facebook had announced their Facebook groups feature, and they were like, "Hey, you can make groups." And me at the time, I was such I had unchecked people pleaser energy where I was just like,
Hmm.
yes, I was just saying yes to anything, to any opportunity
Hmm.
to to grow the community, to make friends online. Um, and so a lot of people were like, hey, create this group. All right, cool. So I
Hmm.
created a Facebook group called LLAG Fam. And then a lot of people were like, well, we want a group for foodies and we want a group for nerds and
Oh
we
yeah,
want
I
to,
saw that. Yeah, I remembered.
yeah. And so we ended up with 13 Facebook
Jesus.
groups. But I,
Wow.
I, I did it under the premise that like, okay, this is everybody's spot. This isn't just my space. It's for
Hmm.
anybody to use it, to promote, to talk about whatever, to just, you know, uh, use it almost like as a community center to do whatever it is that you'd like. Um, but in doing so, I brought on a bunch of moderators who all had their own personalities and
Hmm.
different agendas. Um, one of which ended up scamming people through GoFundMe
Hmm.
campaigns. And so that was a whole ordeal. And so my role on the page shifted dramatically. I was once just this single blogger in college writing about dating, and then here I am managing thousands of people online, plus
Hmm.
thousands of people on these private Facebook groups. Um, and combined with my politics, there was also this concern of like people are doing labor. This is a lot of work to moderate, to manage the content that is being produced onto these platforms. And I really did have like a breakdown of just
Hmm.
like, this is too much. I was just exhausted and worn thin, and I still had a full-time job. Um, and so I felt like I was juggling six different things, speaking events, and I was posting every single day, multiple times a day, and I was doing a podcast. Like it was so much. Um, but I think I learned to just pare down all the things that I had been working on and just distill it into like, okay, if I had to trim everything and just leave like the top 15% of the things that I think I'm strongest at or I want to pursue.
Hmm.
And that's sort of where I am right now, where it's a lot more bare bones, but I'm actually in the process of developing things a little bit more, adding a little bit more onto my plate. Um, Now that my agency is at sort of a different stage. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think starting a community, becoming an influencer or becoming the face of your page, um, it's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of pressure, and I try to tell my clients who've whether they are just starting off or whether they have a platform and they want to grow the platform. I tell them that being an influencer, having a personal brand, having a large brand in general, a social media presence, it's almost akin to being an athlete. Like
Hmm.
there is a certain uh, mental, spiritual, physical fitness that is required to consistently show up.
Hmm.
Even just, I mean, I know just recording and sometimes just making sure that physically I look okay, I feel
Yes.
okay,
Hmm.
I am like checked in mentally into the conversation. Um, that's difficult,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
it's like, I mean, it is a performance, and you start to have a fond appreciation for people who perform because you're like, when I hit the record button, I have to be on, I
Hmm.
have to be tuned in. Um, and so I went through the valleys of, being a nobody, having the page, crawling back into obscurity, finding my way out to,
Hmm.
show up again. And so it's been a fun journey.
Oh, wow. I really appreciate you sharing this because I do think this is a precautionary tale about how do we learn to say no to things that don't align with us, and this guilt that we sometimes carry for saying no or a bit hesitating on that because we're
Hmm.
like, okay, well, this seems like it's a great opportunity. How could I be this silly to just turn this down? And yeah, I think that there comes a point where like the quality of your content, but then the quality of your own life. It's like you have to be in this mental framework. Like I need like the reason why I cannot do more than 2 interviews in a day if I do a recording is because um I need to be able to really process the conversation that I'm going to have. I like to give myself like an hour to kind of like, okay, mentally get myself into this framework. Okay, like the intentionality that I have about these conversations that I want to bring in and going back to the why of it, and and I think that kind of grounds me. But I do think that I think as we get older, we have to give ourselves that permission to step back and reflect because I do see a lot of podcasters and I do see a lot of content creators burn out very quickly, to the point where it's like they just disappear like that. And
Hmm.
it's sad. It's sad for me to watch that. It breaks my heart because I really do believe in their work. And I also, not to say that they aren't doing anything impactful outside of it. I just think that sometimes I'm like, okay, what about the sustainability of it? What does it mean when we have to like, you know, give ourselves a little bit of a break, a little bit of a breathing room so it does not affect our own mental and physical capacity. Um, I'm curious because I know that since COVID, there's been a growing number of content creators, whether they are TikTokers, podcasters, Redditors, YouTubers, and it has been replacing a lot of the traditional media outlets these days. And of course, you go throw in AI. And then how has this current landscape changed the way you approach your work and the responsibilities that you now have as a content creator?
I think the concerns that people have of AI replacing humans and especially AI influencers replacing human influencers. I think there's definitely a segment of the content creator market which is a multi-billion dollar industry. There is a segment that is more promotional and sales based that is more subject to being replaced. I mean, you can just, draft up an AI model to look however you want and they'll, sell these sneakers. Um, but the one thing that AI really can't do is things like this, like
Mhm,
actually having a human-to-human conversation.
mhm,
They can't replace the questions that you would ask me, that
mhm,
only you would ask
mhm,
only me.
mhm,
They can't replace, if something is happening in the news, Trump does something, there is a emergency uh, news story that breaks out. Um, our ability to take our human experiences and expertise um, and use as the filter through which we communicate this story and share it. Um, that's something that AI will never be able to do. Sure,
mhm,
AI can draft good copy and you can teach it to respond to this particular news story. Um, but I think as AI develops, so will our um, radar against AI, and we'll start to notice when things are created by AI, and we'll start to crave, as we are now, craving more human-to-human experiences, craving more in-person experiences, craving things that don't look polished, because they have that human element of human error, or it's that people are preferring a post that is a handwritten doodle.
mhm,
Or handwritten note as opposed to something that is like this polished 3D AI
mhm,
look. And so for me, the way that it's changed my creation um, is really spending more time, like I said before, and marinating on different subjects. I'm always constantly working on different topics that I want to write about, make videos about. Um, and I think one of the things that AI just does not have will never be able to compare with humans is our ability to make connections and to draw conclusions between things that are totally different. Like I could write an article and talk about, hey, here are some patterns between K-pop and Michael Jackson. Like AI
Hmm.
just won't want to create that content on its own.
Hmm.
You have to be able to pull that out.
Hmm.
And so whether you're talking about politics or movies, um, I think for me, I'm just trying to be more grounded in consuming more art and creating more art.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that you hit it on the point because there's a growing number of people that are very wary of AI, especially when you see AI slop with art and how it just isn't good. I mean, it's also just like it's stolen art too. On top of it, it's stolen work, and I think that there is value in like yes, there's some value with AI in terms of like okay, workflow in terms of let's say if I need to get captioning, for those who are hard of hearing and deaf, it's like okay, this does save me a lot of time. On the other hand, it's like I also need my voice. Like it has to sound like my voice. It has to be my voice. It can only come from me because you know, I've been doing this for a while now too, and it's hard for me to want to surrender that autonomy of my own work and and the disservice that it does to my own audience. Um, I also think about like what um sources are they pulling from? Like, like let's say for Gemini, for example, if I am expected to like, ask questions, I need to know where the sources is coming from because I see some of them coming from Reddit and I'm like, yeah, not exactly the best
Yeah,
place of source.
yeah.
And so I think if anything, with the advent of AI and how it's being used and how quickly it's been like multiplying in terms of sophistication and intelligence, um, what can we do to um, make sure that we don't lose sight of the information that's critical that we're missing, and also the human element in our own voices. So it's something I really think about quite a bit, and especially with in this day and age. Do you see, um, because I know that a lot of people are not are consuming news through social media, and I know that I think that there's this underlying responsibility, like, okay, I didn't really sign up to be a news source. Like for me, I didn't think I'd sign up to be in that as like a reporter, reporting on ice threats or whatever. But does that change the way you have to like um approach the news to an audience that has been shifting away from the traditional media landscapes?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. I think what's really interesting about media and journalism, I was the I started off news very early, like in high school. I was in journalism. I was the editor-in-chief of my high school newspaper. And so I always had an interest in magazines and newspapers, whether it's like just the overall design and production of it, or just being in the space of talking about things that are happening in the world. Um, and as we've seen over the last 10, 15 years, legacy media has changed from, no one buys any physical papers to people were all going on BuzzFeed and reading all their news online to now a lot of people don't even go to those websites anymore because the headlines are clipped and turned into TikToks
Mhm.
and carousels. And so there's always going to be a hunger and a thirst for the news and things that are happening. Um, but one of the elements that has changed and has provided a real opportunity for a lot of people is uh, the role of being a reporter and being somebody who has a unique beat. Um, you know, Several years ago when I first started writing, there were specific writers that I would follow because they talked about race and politics, and because you just didn't see that quite often in
Mhm.
newspapers. But nowadays, there's plenty of people who have pages dedicated to these more niche topics. And I think that is the role that a lot of folks like you and I play into, which is, we're not going to be able to compete with actual journalists who
Hmm.
like this is their day in day out job.
Hmm.
They're in person, going to City Hall, getting these papers to report on things and doing really complex, deep work.
Hmm.
But then there's also a lot of things that are swept under the table and issues that maybe the community that you're serving, maybe you are in the uh, Long Beach, California neighborhood and you are reporting on Asian and Black communities. Like
Hmm.
that is a specific niche that unfortunately you're not going to see funding for that position in at the LA Times. And so that is a role that a lot of independent creators can fill. And you're seeing that uh, with a lot more YouTube channels and people who are citizen journalists. I mean, unfortunately, we're also seeing this on the right, whether it's like people like Nick Shirley, who is, basically a Republican op, who broke the story and made that story about Minnesota daycares run by Somalians. He is the one who made that story go viral. But that is an example of the type of industry and an environment that we are in.
Hmm.
In a world where some 20-something-year-old connected to the Republican Party can get exclusive access to an ICE detention center to make content, we on the progressive left have to think, well, what are we doing to advance the stories that are underground that need to be
Hmm.
seen? And so anybody who has an inkling that like, hey, there's this story that's going on, or there's this um, thing that happened in my town that people aren't talking about, and that there's this grave injustice that needs to be brought to light. And I think that if you feel that way, I think that you should follow those instincts,
Hmm.
especially if you are well-intentioned and you believe that you're speaking up for marginalized people,
Hmm.
um, because journalism has been heavily defunded for years, and with Trump coming back into office, with the defunding of PBS, um, with the takeover of CBS and CNN, and the acquisition of a lot of these media companies by, the Larry and David Ellison dynamic duo, buying out TikTok, buying out legacy media. We really have to ask ourselves, well, who is going to report on the news then? If
Hmm.
all this news is being filtered through this oligarch Epstein class lens, then how do we talk about the Epstein files? How do we talk about police brutality? How do we talk about Trump?
Hmm.
Um, and so, whether that is people like us doing our own work on the side or uplifting other journalists who are still doing that work, um, there is always going to be a need and a role that needs to be filled.
Hmm. And with that said, we also talk about the manosphere in podcasting when I was on your show, and how often male podcasters like the Joe Rogans, Andrew Tates of the world create this whole platform to suit the needs of men who are feeling this loneliness epidemic. And I'm very I'm very curious to know how you feel as a male podcaster and the responsibility you have with your platform and how you go about it, because this is something that I definitely think about quite a bit, especially when I was coming back to it, and what does my own male privilege mean, as a podcaster, and also the fact that there are people that are taking it seriously, and then there are people that are very turned off by the manosphere, justifiably so. I'm curious about how that affects you in that space.
Yeah, I mean, when I when the Manosphere first showed up on my timeline and I started to see the content from people like Andrew Tate or the Fresh and Fit podcast or the guys who were going to Thailand and the Philippines as passport bros, um, my gut reaction was like frustration and ick, and like I wanted to just like fight everybody because I mean I've always been against I mean even when I started talking about dating, I always approached it from a more humanistic perspective of like, hey, as men, you can meet other women by just being a good person, by being an interesting and interested person. You don't have to like the whole pickup artist, here's the trick, here's this one, magic bullet that will like
Mhm.
get all the women to want you. Um, I had always placed my f foot firmly in the opposite direction. So then when the Manosphere came in, I was just like, oh, great, like this thing is getting rehashed. So I had made quite a few, and I still make a lot of posts talking about men who have these types of ideologies. Um, because unfortunately, like you said, this industry is huge. There are a lot of people, there is an infinite amount of people who are using AI to create nonstop manosphere content, red pill content to drag down other young men, impressionable young men. And I know I had been criticized a couple times for being so harsh and just straight up saying like, you guys are creepy, you guys are losers, this shit doesn't work, you need to stop. And also more unsavory ways of coming at them. But I look at it from the perspective of like, I'm not going to handle, if you guys are going to advertise yourselves as like big and bad and you don't give a shit and you're going to like manhandle women and try to assert your dominance, then there's no reason why I need to handle you with kid gloves. And I had never understood this tendency to be like, don't say anything to the men because like you're gonna make the lonely men and angry man even more lonely and angry. But I'm like, that is the problem. Like
Mhm.
we can't treat it as if it is this quirky personality difference. Um, we're talking about people with who have been indoctrinated to have this fundamentally flawed, violent mindset.
Mhm.
And whether you are applying that to destroy the women in your lives, women in other countries, or you're using it to break down yourself and you're falling into a pit of depression and then dragging other vulnerable men because you also feel lonely and you need the companionship of other, upset men.
Mhm.
Um, I have also contemplated about like, well, you know, do I post enough encouraging things to men? Do I post enough um, things that are more gentle for men? Because sure, like as much as I want to match fire with a lot of these manosphere men, I know that there are a lot of young men who have good intentions and maybe they just got sucked into it.
Mhm.
Similar to the way that a lot of young men get sucked into uh, gangs, which
Mhm.
function a lot like cults, and they get recruited very young because they don't have uh, uh, positive role models, um, people who they can learn from, and so that is something that I'm also actively working on and trying to think through, but also contemplating about whether or not that is my role, whether or not my role is to uh, speak on it in that way. And so this is something that I have an ongoing dialogue with myself.
Mhm.
But for now, I think that because there's so much endless amounts of horrible manosphere people, I I feel like right now at least, um, I have to match that fire. I have to be able to
Mhm.
call it out
Mhm.
as it is. Um, but I also believe that there are plenty of men who can find inspiration um, and guidance through the people who aren't straight cishet males.
Mhm.
Like I've always been of the belief that like some of the best role models for men are women, are
Mhm.
gay and trans people.
Mhm.
Like I think having this idea that men need another burly macho man to be like, the father figure is ridiculous. And I think that
Mhm.
what men need is more diverse um, role models. So,
Yeah, yeah, and I really appreciate you for bringing this up because I know that this is an ongoing discussion. I think about like the idea of like, okay, these folks are gonna fuck around and find out,
yeah.
or go, or for me to go scorch earth, or use my sense of humor to like, to be very unserious because I don't spend a lot of time like really engaging, but I will, have my smart ass comments here and there. But at
Hmm.
the same time, I also like think of, okay, well, how do I want to model myself to undo the toxic masculinity that I've inherited or had to learn, or now I'm trying to like unlearn and really rethink, reshape the way I view my own cis male cis masculinity, and what does it look like when I'm sharing my own vulnerability, my own honesty, that's basically for myself first, and also how I envision the world to look like if we continue to use healthier practices and build better relationships with people who are very different from us. And what does that look like? What does creating boundaries look like? What does saying no look like? And yeah, I know I was thinking more recently because I know that unfortunately we had the verdict, the not guilty verdict of Rick Chow, an Asian American man, older gentleman, who was cleared of all charges in the murder of 14-year-old Cyrus Carmack Boughton, who is a black kid, and was killed, unfortunately, when Rick chased him out of his store. And this really goes back to the deja vu of what happened 35 years ago with the shooting death of 15-year-old Latasha Harlins by Korean American store owner Soon Ja-doo in LA, which preceded the LA riots. Um, why do you feel that anti-black racism, anti-blackness has such a legacy chokehold on Asian communities across the board?
Yeah, anti-blackness plays a pivotal role for a lot of Asian people.
Mhm.
And I say Asian people because it's not just Asian Americans,
Mhm.
whether it's Asian Australians or, people in Asia, Korea, Philippines, wherever. Um, it plays a pivotal role because of their relationship with whiteness, with colonization. A lot
Mhm.
of times people will try to say, "Oh, I don't care about race." Um, you might not care about race, but your government has. Politics care about race. Um, and I think for a lot of Asian people, I mean, oftentimes there's this conversation about like, oh, Asian people want to be white. Um, and I think a lot of Asian people do want to be white. Uh, but I also think that even beyond just wanting to be white, I think they just see white people and what they attribute with whiteness, whether it is wealth, whether
Mhm.
it is prestige, whether it is attractiveness. Um, People automatically associate these markers with whiteness and with happiness, with all these ridiculous things that they assume come packaged with being in that space, being of that race. Um, and through that narrative, a lot of Asian people see Black people as characters within their story that they can exploit to advance that story.
Mhm.
And whether that is seeing Black people as underneath you, whether that is seeing Black people as your enemy, um, whether that is seeing Black people as a group of people to humiliate. I think a lot of Asian people have adopted, whether consciously or subconsciously, this white supremacist view of looking at Black people as subhuman, as looking at Black people as if they are like garden tools and things that can be used, that can be mined and extracted for value, for pleasure, for entertainment, for ideas. And a lot of Asian people and non-Black people see Black people as just that. Um, and it's really frustrating, um, because, like you said, this is a mirror, a very similar situation with Rick Chow, to what happened 35 years ago with Soon Ja-Du and Latasha Harlins. And knowing how much time has elapsed, knowing how many conversations about race we've had over the last 10 years, 15, 25, 35 years, and seeing that we're re repeating the same mistakes, it is just a reminder that, like I said before, even though you might think that you were checked out of politics, these politicized events continue to happen because we don't learn from our mistakes. Unfortunately, a lot of Asian people don't care about actually interrogating what it means to be Asian, to be Asian American, to be white, to be black. Um, and I think for too long, Asian people have convinced themselves that they can do what white people do, which is not think about race and to whitewash the racialized identity that has been pushed upon them. Because I mean, you see this a lot with like Midwestern Asian people, for example, who
Mhm.
grew up in Texas and all their friends are white, and you talk to them and they have like this Southern accent, and you're like, "Hey, how does it feel to be Asian American?" Asian American, I'm American. I'm Texas, I'm Texan first, and then I'm American. And you just see with like this bold conviction that like they don't see it. They,
Mhm.
even though you know that their friends call him, hey, hey, like whether they call him the Chinese guy because he's Asian, even though he's Filipino or Korean. It's like they've grown up in this highly racist or racialized world, but because they aspire to be white, because they want to be adjacent to whiteness, they think that they can live by not thinking about race, by not thinking about politics, even though they think about race heavily when it comes to Black people. Um, and so I think it's a very multifaceted, very complicated, ongoing issue, that is always changing. There are people who are trying to do the good work, who are Asian Americans, who are unpacking what it means to be Asian, what it means to be white. Um, and it's unfortunate,
Mhm.
it is unfortunate that we still have these problems. It is unfortunate that there's a growing MAGA Asian community. It is unfortunate that there are so many Asians who are in the Manosphere.
Mhm.
And I think the only thing that a lot of us can do, is consistently show up.
Mhm.
Um, as the landscape of media changes, as these political conversations ebb and flow, I think one of the most important things is to be a voice that will always be there to talk about these things. And maybe you post every day, maybe you post every week. Um, I think if you have a voice, if you have an opinion, and you're in this space,
Mhm.
I almost see it like at this point, whether you're an Asian person talking about anti-blackness or whether you are an American talking about, what is happening to Palestinians or to people in Congo, um, it is, I feel like it is your duty. I almost feel like it's like, there is an active information war being waged on all of us, by the billionaire class, by the Epstein class, by capitalism, by the military industrial complex that wants us to believe certain things. And if they are spending billions and trillions of dollars advancing these narratives, um, the only way that people can actually combat that is to see in themselves that they are a lighthouse, that they can be a voice, and they don't have to have $1 billion, $1 billion. But if there are millions of us, using our collective smaller voices, then we can have one giant megaphone to talk about these things. And I think going back on anti-blackness within the Asian community, um, I just hope more Asian people who are waking up are actively speaking up about it, whether it
Mhm.
is a short little post, whether it is creating more consistent content, whether it is showing up on people's podcasts to just say, "Hey, I'm Asian, and fuck anti-blackness." Like, I think that is really important. However you want to show up, um, I think showing up is the most important part.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate this discussion because it is clearly ongoing. I mean, like how do we bridge the gap between Asian and Black, Asian Latine, um, and what other marginalized communities and the intersections of it, and and also like we see a lot of distrust from Black communities with Asian folks because I mean it's not just the racism that they've experienced from Asian folks, but also the displacement of Black neighborhoods to make room for Asian Americans, for Asian communities, because they weren't welcome in white spaces, which we forget that. And I think that there is this value of like being able to show where Asian and Black solidarity has happened, with the Grace Lee Boggs of the world or what Malcolm X and Yuri Kochiyama did. But um, but I also think that there is like um also what we forget about is the Blasian community that's also growing too, because that is a particular demographic that does get ignored quite a bit. I mean, I know we are hearing a lot about the Asians, but I do think that that also opens up the conversation. What about Black Asians or Asian Latine, Asian Indigenous, or the different intersections of Asian identities, whether you're like Palestinian and Chinese, like
Hmm.
we are a melting pot, and I do think that there comes this this very different layers of narrative and what we need to think about and address in the room that we're not all very monolithic, and certainly we're not homogenized separately in a way because we are also blending in. So
Oh
that's like a
yeah.
thought that comes to mind too when
Oh
you hear.
yeah, 100%. I mean, I have been a huge advocate um, of. I mean, when I first started writing, I was a really strong advocate of saying that Asian people aren't just East Asians. Asia isn't just China, Japan, and Korea. And I have always pushed and advocated to expand that identity so people can understand that South Asians and Southeast and South Asians exist. Um, but over the last 5 years, I've really started to advocate more for, I mean, we need to also look at people in Palestine and Iraq
Mhm.
as like they're also Asians. They experience
Absolutely.
a very different racialized version of what that is. But if you are somebody who is outraged about things that are happening to Asian people, um,
Mhm.
whether it is in the United States or through, you know, war, I think it's imperative that we see the plight of Palestinians
Mhm.
and folks in West Asia as
Mhm.
our people. They might not look like me or you, but they are still our people.
Mhm.
And like you said, Asia is a melting pot. I mean, I'm
Mhm.
also uh, an advocate for looking at um, a lot of folks in Russia and
Mhm.
North Asia
Mhm.
who are also Asian. I mean, a lot of them just they look straight up Asian, um, but I think that for so long we have allowed the Asian identity to be defined by Europeans and white people.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, even the fact that the whether you're talking about namings such as Oriental or
Mhm.
Far East Asia,
Mhm.
um, all these terms were created relative to the
Mhm.
West.
Mhm.
It's called Far East because for a long time they didn't realize that Japan existed. They thought that the end of the world was Jerusalem in the Middle East. Um, and so I deeply implore Asian people to really think about what it means to be Asian while also accepting the fact that Palestinians are Asians, that Indians are Asians, that Filipinos and North Asians are also Asian. Um, because I think that when we really look at ourselves that way, I mean, a lot of Europeans, a lot of white people, they come from all different parts, but they call themselves white.
Mhm.
And yet, for a lot of Asians, we want to have these monikers of, jungle Asian and fancy Asian, all this ridiculous shit. Um, when I think the real conversation is, what happens when we realize that all these different Asian people and their narratives and their struggles, and the ongoing wars that are happening over there, what happens when we really ingest that as part of our people too?
Hmm. Yeah, and also I know that there's been like this push to change the Middle East to West Asians, Central West Asians, and then Central Asians um, because Middle East was like kind of like the moniker that the Europeans placed, and I think that there is like this new way of trying to disrupt narratives um that are well, I don't want to say inconvenient, but that are just not telling the nuance and the full aspect of, the geographic, but also the people that reside in these regions and North Africa. That's another part of it too. I mean, you include Egypt and Morocco. Yeah, I mean it's a whole different, very different dynamic, and I think being able to frame that is incredibly vital in how we see ourselves as Asians and a lot of the alignments and the differences that we carry within us. And um, most recently, you launched Seasoned Fighters, and I was on your show earlier this year. And what are you looking forward to do with this new platform, and what can we expect?
So I started Season Fighters because I had my previous podcast, Lag Radio, and I had run that for 4 years. Um, and I really enjoyed it. I really just enjoyed the opportunity to um, give a lot of marginalized folks, a lot of people of color, an opportunity to just share their story. Um, but I actually wanted to start Season Fighters because I wanted to make it even more special. I wanted to do even more promotion around it. I wanted to expand it and allow it to be a standalone brand. And so I have a sponsorship right now that I'm working with a spirits company called Swanee Spirits. So they make Carolina Gold rice,
Mm,
uh, which is rice that was farmed by um, Africans in the Rice Coast. And I wouldn't have been able to do that in my previous podcast,
mhm,
um, simply because the branding was just different.
mhm,
I think the branding really set the stage and allowed me some opportunities that I didn't have previously. And so I I want to do so many different things. So whether it is doing more sponsorships and collaborations with
mhm,
brands um, owned and run by people of color, but I also want to do some in-person stuff. I want to
mhm,
actually go out and meet people, touch grass, see people in Arizona,
mhm,
and see if I can do stuff in person. Um, and seeing it as its own separate brand um, allows me to just branch off and do other mini projects. So, whether I do merch or I create something separate underneath it, like a more long form series. Um, you know, I'm I'm just excited to have another project that similar to what I was saying before, on lag, I talk a lot about politics, a lot of things that happen at a more fast pace, whereas
mhm,
Season Fighters is a little bit more slow cooked, It takes a
Hmm.
little bit more time, but I really enjoy that pace because I could do things like this. I can have a conversation
Yeah.
um, that is more fleshed out, that is a lot more nuanced, um, and it just gives me the space that I feel like the people on my podcast deserve. I think a lot of people of color, unfortunately, when we do get invited to podcasts and events, sometimes we're treated as, the side attraction or, not given as much time.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, and I've always just believed in seeing my guests and wanting to roll out the red carpet,
Hmm.
um,
Yeah.
in that sense. And so I'm just excited for the different possibilities. I'm open to so many different things, and I can't wait. I mean, it's only been my first season doing this, so
Yeah.
I know that in doing my podcast for multiple seasons, that it changes every single year, and things get more refined and things get better. Your process gets better. So
Mhm.
I'm just loving the learning process right now.
Yeah, and what I really appreciated about being a guest on your show is like, yeah, you were very kind and very, sincere, but also like I loved your promos that you had of my episode, and you put a lot of care to it. Like, you were sharing like the intricacies of cilantro, which I would never have known about, or because I don't have the botany knowledge. Um, but yeah, but I thought that was very great that the way you were trying to build up, the stories outside of what we're trying to capture like certain lens of that story and put it to another different context or a whole new context. And so that was something I really appreciated. And I did realize that people were really engaging very heavily with it, and of course, there's always going to be people, as you know, and you and I know that when I would say something and I'm like you and I will shoot our mouths off, at certain moments, and we get a lot of blowback. But I'm like, okay, well, thanks for engaging with my content.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. I don't feel like I need to read anymore on it. It's like I got a life.
Yeah.
I want to step outside, and it's like once I'm done like recording, and once I'm done creating like something on Instagram Reels or YouTube Short, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna spend the next couple hours just kind of going to a park somewhere and just like really meditate because I have to remember myself like we're all in this real world. It's like we have a real world that we also can still live in, without having to always be glued to the digital world 24/7, which our ancestors would never have dreamed of, and we're not, and our bodies and mind were not built to process information 24/7, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, and anything else you're working on for this year besides the podcast
I
or for yourself in general,
uh I'm working on a lot of different things. So I mean, from the lag side of things, um, I've been reporting on the Iran war
Mhm.
since it started in February 28th, and I think in reporting on that topic alone has reminded me of the important role that I play in sharing the news, and whether it is through a more digestible format such as memes,
Mhm.
um, or which I'm also working on is bringing back my news segment and my newsletter,
Mhm.
which is a lot of work,
Mhm.
but I tested it out last year. I started my newsletter, Lag Bites,
Mhm.
um, and I really enjoyed it, but it is a whole lot of work
Mhm.
doing. And so now I'm just sort of taking those experiences and thinking, well, if I reboot the news series, how does that look? How do I do that while still maintaining enough uh, energy, creative energy to do season fighters and to
Mhm.
do memes and to do talking head videos. And so on the lag side of things where I talk more about politics and culture, there's a lot that I want to do. And I think the biggest thing really is to just try to show up more on camera. I think a, t a very underrated skill is being able to just like take your phone and like, hey guys, I have my thoughts about this thing. Like
Yeah.
I'm always like record, delete. I gotta like change
I
it
I
and
know. I've done that because I think like I'm starting to do more Instagram or YouTube shorts. And like for a while, it's like I feel like I couldn't talk off the cuff, and that was a struggle of mine. And now I'm like, okay, I'm building the muscles, I'm becoming more comfortable with what I'm saying, and yes, and I'm have to like, understand how the algorithms affects it and how it pushes out that content. So yeah, I think that there comes a point it's like, okay, I don't get too caught up in the full on production of it because I'm like I think it's kind of a waste of time, and I just kind of want to be just show up as myself
Yeah.
and not waste so much of my time and energy trying to recreate something to really please the masses, and I think that that part of it, like, being, in this work is to like disrupt certain norms that have been very harmful, and I think even like the idea of perfecting things is kind of like a tool of capitalism and white supremacy, which people were shocked when I said that because someone had said that perfection is a tool of white supremacy, and it's like, yes, it makes sense because it feeds off of capitalism. It
Hmm.
forces us to be perfect
Hmm.
and to use our labor. And I'm like, yeah, I think about Trisha Hersey and Nap Ministry, and she's like, yeah, like no, I'm not gonna do this. We should not allow ourselves to to do this hustle and grind and martyr ourselves in this work because I
Hundred percent.
it's not necessary, but it's also that's what will eliminate us. And yeah,
Yeah.
mhm,
I mean, it's like, and I totally agree. I mean, like, I think that's why I wanted to really take on doing more just regular videos where I'm not. I mean, I have I had to remind myself that I have seasoned fighters specifically for that. If I wanted to be a
mhm.
perfectionist, at least I can apply that to making my guests look perfect. I don't have to put that pressure on myself.
Mhm.
And so I had to learn to be more okay with, you know what? I got a pimple right here. I gotta record the video.
And
So
yeah, it's like, okay, if I have like a bloody nose, then okay, maybe then I shouldn't
yeah,
record
yeah,
from
yeah.
that. So
Yeah. So I've been doing that to sort of feed that side. But I've also been working a lot on the agency side of things. We're transitioning the agency to align ourselves more so we can work with more nonprofit organizations.
mhm,
I think the type of work that is required for nonprofit
mhm,
is very different. They have very different marketing challenges. So
mhm,
I brought on a couple people who are experts in the field who can help me out. So I'm working on that side, on the agency side. But then on my personal Rainier side, I'm a gardener. I'm
mhm, mhm.
a video game, fighting game nerd. I'm a combat sports nerd. So there's a lot of like niche little things that I want to do in terms of content or just things I wanted to do on my own self. Um, but yeah, I'm firing on all cylinders. I think this year, um, it's really about that comprehensive balance of making sure that the side of me that is business is taken care of, the side of me that is more political and uh, more focused on writing and activism is well fed, and that the nerdy family cooking side of me also gets some love and attention.
Yeah, and last question is, if you were to go back to yourself 15 years ago when you started this blog and to where it is now, what would you say to that younger version?
Ah, I, as much as there's a part of me that would want to try to establish, again, like we were saying, this perfectionism to try to tell, like, all right, do this so things work out better or whatever. I would just encourage my old self and say, you know what? I think you're doing great. I think that
Mm,
you have you have the right idea. Um, you can say no. You don't have to accept every single project and anything that comes onto your plate. Um, but you are enough,
mhm,
and the work that you're doing is perfectly fine. You don't have to overexert yourself. You don't have to punish yourself with productivity, which is something that I feel like I had done before. I was so eager to work and to feel like after the end of the day, I was worked by
mm,
by the stuff that I was doing, and that burnt me out. And it took me years years to refill that cup.
Mhm.
And so I would just reassure myself that you know, take things at your own pace.
Mhm.
Uh, there's a lot that's going to happen, and as long as you're just committed to speaking up, and you can take some times to touch grass and take a break, but as long as you just show up, that's the
Mhm.
important part.
Yeah. And where can people find your work? I know that I encourage people to, follow seasoned fighters, but yeah, where else can people follow your work?
So I'm all over the place, whether it's on Facebook, Instagram, um, TikTok, YouTube. You can find me at LLAG or the Love Life of an Asian Guy on YouTube. I'm over at Lag Media, and yeah, you'll see me everywhere. Also on Threads.
And yeah, thank you so much for being on my show. It's been a pleasure to have this wonderful conversation and, all the best to you.
Awesome. It's honestly been great having you uh, chat. I mean, even just our podcast last time, and I know I definitely want to chat again, so I'll probably invite you again.